Shalom, Israel. This will be a very brief video regarding the true calendar of Yahuwah, and it is found in the King James Bible. It is found in Genesis chapters 7 and 8 during the account of the flood, and it is a fixed 364-day calendar of 12 months of 30 days, and it has 4 dividers throughout the year. The 4 special days that divide the 4 seasons of the year are called Tekufa in ancient Hebrew, but are commonly known by the modern world as the spring equinox, the summer solstice, the fall equinox, and the winter solstice. We as believers and followers of Yahuwah need to be on the Father's timeline instead of the beast's timeline. I will prove with scripture that all of the interpretations of the TaNaK or Enoch calendar are wrong. They're based on a faulty interpretation, and sadly, a lot of our Israelite congregations are following the faulty interpretation of the TaNaK calendar, and it's a simple mistake. This is not to bash my brothers who are doing wonderful and blessed work. But sadly, as I said, they are following that faulty interpretation, which is an honest mistake. But we need to understand that the scripture is not open for private interpretation. We need to let the scripture interpret itself, and not only that, but the calendar that the Father gave us. It needs to line up completely with what scripture says. And I know that even there are people that believe that we're supposed to look for the barley harvest. And that is an inaccurate way to try to follow a calendar. Suppose you're traveling to a different, location, or living in an ark for an entire year, where Yahuwah himself sealed it, where you can't see the sky, or you're not even around anybody's barley because it's been flooded. And I know that we were supposed to have the Pesach in ancient times at the place where Yahuwah put his name, in Jerusalem. But in our time, those of us that would like to observe it as a remembrance, which we are to observe it as a remembrance, contrary to what the Western Church has told us, that in essence, obedience was nailed to the cross. We can follow the true timeline of the Father by knowing this particular calendar, no matter if the heathen sprays geoengineering trails all up in the heavens, the Shemayim. Let's not call it heaven anymore, because that's the place where Yahuwah dwells. And no matter how heavily they spray, and they seem to always do this right around the 4 special days, the Tikafot, which is the circuit of the sun, and the days that the sun and the moon have coming in the same gates. I'm looking outside my window here, coming through the same gate, as the Book of Enoch says, and where we have equal day and equal night, as close to equal as possible. And usually on those days, the heathen, you'll see the planes up there spraying like crazy, trying to block so you can't see. I've been observing it for the past several years, and it never fails. That when you wake up in the morning, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll go and to the place where I could see the sunrise, and have my ram's horn with me, my shofar, and without fail they will have already sprayed all night long, covering up the Shemayim. So with this calendar, no matter what they do, we'll be able to know the timeline of the Father, and it is the true calendar. I'm telling you without a shadow of doubt. No one can debunk this calendar. It's irrefutable. This is Yah's calendar. This is the calendar that Noach followed when he built the ark. It's the calendar that all of the true Yahsrelites followed from the beginning of time all the way up until now. I mean, all the way up until I believe the time of Yahushua. Because even if, as we read in the Brit Hadashah, or the Renewed Covenant, also called the New Testament, we will see that his supper, which I believe was Pesach, or Passover, was on a different time than the Jews, who I believe were mainly Edomite Jews. Who are not really Jews, because we get the word Jew from Yehuda. And everyone who's been researching knows that Yehuda is a black family, a black nation. And it's the way that the Father chose it. And we can look at the old artifacts from the Assyrian frieze, or frieze, if I'm pronouncing that correct, of the Assyrian captivity of Lachish. We see right clearly the men of Yehuda going into the Assyrian captivity with nappy beards and nappy hair.
So you can see soldiers, Assyrians, invading, trying to come up the siege ramps, and meanwhile torches and stones are being thrown down by the people from Lachish to try to defend the city. You see some other defenders and archers in this tower right here from Lachish. So this is a peek into an ancient battle scene. As good as it gets, high definition. Now let's look down here. You can come a little closer. Let's look down here. Somebody tell me what you see right here. Slaves, yeah, you see some people there. And they've got their candles, they've got some valuables that they're stealing from the city. They've got candlesticks, and they've got other valuable objects, but not only objects, they've got valuable human resources. Slaves, you can see a mother and a child being carted off into slavery, into exile right here in Lachish. Alright, so if you want to come to the corner. So let's continue down the line. We've got more slaves that are leaving the city.
Now somebody tell me the difference between this guy and this guy. Whose side do you think this guy's on? The Assyrians, yeah, the conquerors, the Assyrians. And whose side do you think this guy's on? The slave, yeah, the people from Israel or Lachish. You can tell also by their distinctive hairstyle depicted in archaeology.
Alright, now as we come down the line, you see the slaves are being forced to bow down or pay homage to King Sennacherib himself.
Shout out to that kid.
Twice per year, we have the closest that can be of 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night. These 2 days happen to be on the Shabbat and the first day of the week. This is confirmed by an occurrence back in 2017 on the 23rd day of September. So again, September 23rd, 2017, which was on a Shabbat. Before Yahuwah struck the firstborn of the Egyptians, or the Mizrahites, Yahuwah told Moshe, this month will be the beginning of months for you. I believe, just my personal belief, that that day was on the Shabbat. Could have also been on the first day of the week. Because with Yahuwah's calendar, it ends on the Shabbat, and it begins, the year ends on the Shabbat, and it begins on the first day of the week. Just like the cycle of the week. The first day of the week is the beginning, and then the seventh day of the week is rest. The ending of the week, the ending of the year. Over the years, when doing this work, I began to perceive the possibility that any calendar that we follow that is not based on what Yahuwah gave us, that is not his timeline, is a facet of the mark of the beast. No matter whether it's based on the moon cycles or the sun, with the wrong interpretations of all these other heathen calendars, any of those is a mark of the beast. If you're solely following it. We had no idea of knowing it because we did not have that understanding. But now we have this understanding. And it is my prayer that once I show you this very brief video, that you will be able to understand it and put it first in your day. While it's difficult to completely eliminate the beast calendar from existence, we must utterly destroy it from our thoughts. We must destroy it from our minds by putting the calendar of Yahuwah first, by basing your lives upon it, as I mentioned before, in your foreheads, and by it being firmly in your hands, by the things that you do, your works. As a side note, many people may not agree with me on this next major point. Yet we are called to study in order to show ourselves approved. And it is by the breath of Yahuwah and through diligent study that I understand and accept that certain apocryphal writings are also critically valid and must be included as scripture and regarded as such. These books were quoted by both Yahushua the Messiah and his disciples. If we only look at the 66 books that we now have, then we're only coming at the entire scripture and our entire eternity with only half the story. They are of the utmost importance in order to understand the entire history of the actual genetic and biblical 12 tribes of Israel. From the time of the promise of Abraham to the births of Yitzhak and Yaakov, better known as Isaac and Jacob, to the births of the 12 sons of Yaakov and the history of the 12 tribes, to the time of Yahushua and his 12 disciples, unto this very day. It is impossible to understand without the apocryphal writings. That is the reason why they were taken out. All esteem, honor, and power unto the Most High Yahuwah through the name of Yahushua. Now for the calendar. And I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall rise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. I'd like to emphasize Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, because ever since I found out that when the 365-day Gregorian count was introduced in 1582, taking place of the 365 to 366-day Julian count over a span of over 300 periods of 365 days, instead of the 364 days per year of the calendar of YAHUAH, I realized that everything from the festivals of YAHUAH to the 400-year prophecy regarding our final captivity would be confused by the changing of the times and laws prophesied by Daniel. In order to accurately calculate the festivals of YAHUAH, the 364-day count is important. As for the end of the 400-year prophecy, I believe that it is best to focus on getting our lives in order and on Abba Yah's timeline, and leaving the exact end of that prophecy into him. As it stands, an unimaginable number of souls will be lost because of sin. Sin is missing the mark. It's defined that in the New Testament, or the Brit Hashah. And it is something that people have been misled about. You know, we've been misled about even the meaning of sin. YAHUAH set his mark in his calendar, his laws, and his statutes and commandments. So let this be our focus. Now, let's turn to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Genesis 1 and 1. In the beginning, Elohim created the Shemayim and Aretz. The phrase "in the beginning" is transliterated in ancient Hebrew as Barashit. Here we see this phrase in both modern Hebrew and in Paleo-Hebrew. Next, let's look at it in the ancient pictographic Hebrew. Now here is the first line of scripture that I wrote in ancient pictographic Hebrew. It is when we look at it in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, we can see that this sentence gives the reader a picture of creation taking place in the first state before time came into existence. In other words, everything that follows after this first state, and we will later see that the word spoken here has other words that are related that were used in Genesis chapter 8 during the flood account, and when YAHUAH spoke to Moshe right before the Passover. In ancient Ibri, or ancient Hebrew, the first letter of Genesis is pronounced Ba, and is the foundation of the letter B. It is an overhead picture of a tent. When we read it at the beginning of a word in ancient Hebrew, it signifies the mental picture of the idea of in, like as in something, as inside of something. The word in used in modern connotations can take the position of a preposition, being a function word that indicates position in time, limits, or place. It can also be used as an adjective, a noun, or an adverb. As you see, it is a very complex word, but in this case, since we're talking about time, we will focus on its prepositional meaning. Remember this as we move on to the next part of this sentence, Rashith. Strong's H7225, Rashith, from the same as H7218, the first in place, time, order, or rank, specifically a first fruit, beginning, chiefest, first fruits, or first part, or first time, principal thing. As we see the Strong's Concordance definition of this word here, written also in ancient pictographic Hebrew, Rashith also means first fruits, a dedication of the firstborn, as in the case of Shemuel and Yahushua after his resurrection, or our first fruits increase, as in the case of Cain and Abel. Remember this as you think of whatever calendar you're following. Unto whom is the focus of your dedication of the time that you were given on this earth? Regarding the word in, signified by the letter bat or bait as some call it, again, since our focus is a calendar, we will look at it in reference to timeline. We see that this word is connected to Strong's number 87218. Strong's H7218, Rosh, from an unused root apparently meaning to shake the head, as most easily shaken, whether literally or figuratively, in many applications of place, time, rank, etc. Band, beginning, captain, a chapiter or chief, as in chiefest place, chiefest man, or chiefest things, a company, end, every man, excellent, first, forefront, be as in head, height, on as in on high, on highest, part or priest, lead, poor, principal, ruler, some or top. Now let's look at Genesis chapter 8 verse 13, after the earth began to dry. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, in the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noach removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. We're beginning to see a connection to the ancient Hebrew word Rashith and this word Rosh. You will see a connection again later in the book of Exodus when Yahuwah reintroduced his calendar to the ancient Yashraelites through Moshe. We have several key words that we'll take a deeper look at. The first is H7223, which is, as we will see, connected to another Hebrew word, which has a connection to H7221. H7221 is connected to H7218, which also has the same meaning as H7218. I know this may sound confusing, but it's all good because it all ties together in a moment. Let us start with Strong's Concordance number H7223. Strong's H7223, Rishon, from H7221, first, in place, time, or rank, as an adjective or noun, an ancestor that were before or before time, beginning, eldest, first, for as in forefather or foremost, a former as in former thing, of old time or past. In order to get to the nitty-gritty of this word that means beginning, or first in place, time, rank, or foremost, before time, etc., we must first look at the word that H7223 is connected to, and that's Strong's Concordance number H7221. Strong's H7221, Risha, from the same as H7218, a beginning, as in beginning. Now, this is getting interesting because around 2013, there was another extremely important instance where, during a study, I came across a certain name that was found to not have been used anywhere in Scripture, yet it was defined in the Strong's. As we see here, this was only used one time in the Scripture. You may have noticed the hint at the beginning of the introduction of that word that was defined in the Strong's but not used in the Scripture. It is connected to a certain place in the Book of YAHUAH or Joshua, where the Yashraelites made war with the inhabitants there who had named the land after their idol. As a matter of fact, whenever this has happened, meaning as in when something is showed up in the Strong's Concordance, but it didn't appear in the Scripture, it seemed to me always as if there was something that the translators did not want us to know on a grand scale. Regarding that name, I will do a video on it at a later date, Yah willing. Now let's read the instance where this particular word 7221 or Strong's H7221 was used. Yehezkel or Ezekiel, chapter 36 and 11. And I will multiply upon you man and beast, and they shall increase and bring fruit. And I will settle you after your old estates, and will do better unto you than at your beginnings. And ye shall know that I am Yahuwah. Yea, I will cause men to walk upon you, even my people Yashrael. And they shall possess thee, and thou shalt be their inheritance. And thou shalt no more henceforth bereave them of men. These verses are a prophecy regarding when Yahuwah will restore and reintroduce his chosen people back to the mountains of Yashrael. And we see that that time will be better than at our beginning. Now, in order to follow this trail back to the calendar of our Creator, let's next look at the word that is connected with this instance. Strong's reference number H7218. We're about to see things complete a circuit in a moment, just like the sun does over the face of the earth at the revolution of the year. That word and definition looks familiar. Strong's H7218, Rosh, from an unused root, apparently meaning to shake the head, as most easily shaken, whether literally or figuratively, in many applications of place, time, rank, etc., band, beginning, captain, or chapter, chiefest, as in chiefest place, chiefest man, or chiefest things, a company, end, every, as in man, or every man, excellent, first, forefront, be, as in be, the head, height, on high, or on, as in on high, or highest part, or high priest, lead, poor, a principal, a ruler, a sum, or top. This is the word that we saw, which is connected to Strong's H7225, which is in the very first sentence of Scripture, Bereshith, in the beginning. Now we have an understanding of the first sentence used in Scripture, which is connected to the word H7218, that means first. Now, let's do a quick review. H7218 and H7223 are from H7221. We can say then that H7221 is the foundation word of H7218 and H7223, all of which gives the reader a picture of something having the first position and place in time. H7223, seen here during the flood account after the earth dried in Genesis chapter 8 verse 13, and H7225, found in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, are therefore tied together by way of Strong's H7221 through Strong's H7218, all having a similar meaning. Therefore, we can honestly perceive that as we read Genesis 8 verse 13 in context, with the Strong's definition of the ancient Hebrew word for year, which is Shana, as a revolution of time, which is signified in this verse by the reference number H8141, as I mentioned, which is transliterated as Shana, we can see that this is the beginning of the year, the Rishon Shana in ancient Hebrew. Before we get into this next slide, it is important to bring to your attention two words in this verse that are typed in grayscale. You will see this in most translations, and it shows where a word was added all together or included in a verse in order to form a complete sentence in European languages. To a great detriment in this case, we completely lose the fact that not only is this the beginning of the year, this day was the Tekufa, called in this case the spring equinox, and is both a day of remembrance within the flood account and one of the 4 days that divide the 4 quarters of the year and leads the 3 months of each season. These 4 days are not counted in the reckoning of the year according to TaNaK, called Enoch, the 7th from Adam. In a brief moment, I will verify this using the King James translation, aka the KJV. So now let's read Genesis chapter 8, verse 13 with the correct context. Remember that the words typed in grayscale do not appear in the Hebrew. And it came to pass, in 1st and 600th year, in chief or head, in 1st towards month, the waters were dried up from the earth, and removed Noach, Aleph Tah, or Alt, covering of the ark, and looked, and here was the face of the ground. Now let's go to Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 will be our focus. Exodus 12, verses 1 and 2. And Yahuwah spake unto Moshe and Aharon in the land of Mizraim, saying, This month unto you the beginning of months, it the first month of the year to you. So we see in verse 2 that Strong's number 87218 is there for the Hebrew word Rosh, which, as we covered in a previous slide, means beginning. Here we see that Yahuwah expresses to Moshe and Aharon that this is an important month and is a renewal of time. We see the Strong's number 87223 again, also, Rishon, which means chief or head, the chief month of the year. As I stated in the introduction, there are 2 days during the equinox where we have 2 days that are within mere seconds that are equal day and equal night, forget about mankind's mathematical calculations used to claim a 365.2424 day year. Yah gave us a 364-day calendar year, and it is perfect. In verse 2 here, the beginning of the year in ancient Abrit or ancient Hebrew was named by Yahuwah as Rishon Kodesh, not Rishon Yarach, which Yarach means moon. Let's see the ancient Abrit or Hebrew word for beginning. But before that, I must mention that the word Chodesh also means a renewal. Okay, that's where we get the name Hadassah from, or Hadasha, or Hadassah, as some people say. And that, again, means to renew. It specifically also means month, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the moon cycles. The Father gave us a name for the moon, and He gave us a name for the month. The Father used both the sun and the moon to bring in the year during the solstices and during the equinoxes, as we spoke of before. And one last mention of those 2 days that are within mere seconds of each other, they occur on, one is on the Shabbat and the other is on the first day of the week. Now, let's go on to the next slide. Again, we see the word Rosh. H7218, Rosh, from an unused root apparently meaning to shake the head, as most easily shaken, whether literally or figuratively in most applications, and you know the rest. Rosh. Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And Yahuwah spake unto Moshe and Aharon in the land of Egypt, or Mizraim, saying, The month, this to you, beginning of months. Chief head, he to you, renew the year. So by tying the word Rosh used here in Exodus 12 to its connected word seen in the very first day of creation, Rashith, is how verse 2 reveals to us where the beginning of the year is. Not during the middle of the week on the fourth day or any other day during the week, as we see with some of the mistranslations of the TaNaK calendar, or with the moon calendars. Neither does the Shabbat float as it appears on the interpretations that don't place the 4 special days or dividers in their respective stations in the 4 quarters of the year. So Yahuwah told Moshe that this month will be the beginning of months for you, and to you will be the chief or head of the year. And after counting 10 days from that day, then on the 10th day selecting the lamb without blemish for the Passover. Then counting 4 more days and coming to the 14th day, the Pesach or Passover, and slaying the lamb between the evenings. The firstborn of Mizraim were slain on that day. And early the morning of the first day of the week, Yahuwah brought the children of Yisrael out of the land of Mizraim, or Egypt as we know it today. Next slide. Identifying the 364 days of the year during the flood. Now let's first see that the year during the flood was and still is 364 days. Then we will also find out the problem with every man-made interpretation of this calendar, including the interpretation of it found at Qumran. And lastly, we will verify these 4 special days that are not counted in the reckoning of the year, just as TaNaK recorded for us a few hundred years before the flood. Okay, now what I've done is I added up all the numbers here, and I'm gonna try to give you guys a screenshot of one of the calendars that I've done in the past, so that way you'll be able to see it being calculated on a calendar as well. But for time's sake, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and go through the scripture and then show you where these numbers come from. All right, now the first 7 days, we're going to find these in verse 4 and in verse 10. Okay, the reason why I say verse 4 and verse 10 is because the Father is giving a preface of him going to cause it to rain in 7 days. For yet 7 days I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And we look down here in verse 10, and we see that and it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. We're going to do a little check mark here at that number 7, because that's the first 7 days. And I'll also circle the 2 places where we get these 7 days. Okay, now for the 40 days, it's the same thing. When we get down here to verse 12, we see that the rain was upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. We're going to go ahead and circle that. And this was a summation of what the Father said was going to happen up here in verse 4. So we're going to check off that 40 days. Let's take a look at verse 24. We're going to see the first instance of the 150 days. To the right, I'm going to go ahead and put a little check mark next to that 150 days. Now, what the Father has told us through Moshe is that when Noah was going through the flood, the waters prevailed. They increased first, and then they prevailed exceedingly. We see that they increased first, and then prevailed exceedingly. Everything died upon the earth. Then we're going to see that the waters prevailed upon the earth for the 150 days. Okay, next what we're going to look at here in chapter 8 is we're going to see a little bit of a confirmation of that 150 days. We're going to look at verse 3 here. And the waters returned from off the earth continually, and after the end of 150 days, the waters were abated. Then the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. This is extremely important here, because now what we're going to do is we're going to start counting another period of days. Okay, and that is where we get this to the right here, the number 74. There were 74 days from the time the ark rested on Mount Ararat to the time in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, when the mountains were seen. We're going to go ahead and circle that here. And if I was to show you, which we don't have time to do that today, that this also is the Rishon Chodesh, the first day of the month, not moon. Okay, now in the next period of days is 40 days, another 40 days. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. We're going to go ahead and circle that. That's this 40 days right here. And he sent forth a raven, which went to and fro, until the waters were dried up off the earth. And he also sent a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned into him to the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. And he put forth his hand, and took her, and pulled her into the ark, or pulled her unto him into the ark. Now verse 10, and he stayed yet another 7 days. Again he set forth the dove out of the ark. We're going to take a look to the right here and put a check mark for the first period of 7 days after he waited 40 days. Okay, moving right along. We're going to find the next period of 7 days. In verse 11, and the dove came into him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off, So Noah knew that the waters were abated from the earth. And he stayed yet another 7 days, and sent forth the dove, which returned not again to him any more. Okay, there's our other 7 days. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the Rishon Kodesh, in the Rosh of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. Okay, now, the last period of days that we looked at was that second period of 7 days right here. But yet we read here in verse 13, and it came to pass in the 601st year in the first month that the waters were dried up off the earth. And for counting on the calendar, we add 35 days. And we end up with a total of all of these days to 360 days. Then we add the 4 special days that are not counted in the reckoning of the year, according to TaNaK, and we arrive at the 364 days during the flood. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that 150 days that we took a look at before occurred over a period of 5 months. I'm going to write that down. Occurred over 5 months. Now, during that 150 days over the 5 months, we had one of those special days, the summer solstice, as it's called today, which is, again, one of those special days that are not counted in the reckoning of the year. So 5 months of 30 days each is 150 days. Okay, so here's that calendar I promised. This is from a few years back. I've got several of these dating back from 2017 at September 23rd on the Shabbat. What I've done here is I've cleaned this one up and put the periods of time color-coded to make it easier for you to follow along. So we see the first period of 7 days here in the beginning of the month of Abib in Genesis chapter 7 verses 4 and 7 verses 6 through 11. In red, we have the 40 days and 40 nights signified by Genesis chapter 7 verses 4 and verse 12. I've signified the 150 days as we see in Genesis chapter 7 verse 24 in black. You'll see that carry on all the way up to the 7th month on the 17th day of the month when the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. That also is corresponded by chapter 8 verses 1 through 4. In brown, we see Genesis chapter 8 verses 5, where we have that period of 74 days, ending on the Rishon Chodesh of the 10th month. In green, we see that signified by Genesis chapter 8 verses 6, and it goes on from the 2nd day of the 10th month all the way down to the 6th day of the week of the 11th month. That's the 40 days and 40 nights, the second block of 40 days and 40 nights. In scarlet, I have Genesis chapter 8 verses 10 through 11. That's the first period of 7 days. In purple, I have, as signified by Genesis chapter 8 verse 12, the second period of 7 days when Noah sent the dove out the ark. The first period of 7 days, he actually sent a raven and a dove. And in blue, we have the 35 days, as it says in Genesis chapter 8 verse 13, and it came to pass. Okay, so that goes all the way up to the Tekufa, which is not counted in the reckoning of the year. And when we add all those days up, we end up with a year of 364 days. It never changed. And therefore, our year as it stands today, as the believers of Yahuwah, is a 364-day year. I snapped this photo on the morning of the Tekufa of March 20th, this recent one here in 2021. And I also have a couple of other pictures I'm going to show you and the video that proves that the sun came up at 7:35 and it went down at 7:35 exactly. Okay, precisely 12 hours in a day, just like Yahushua said in the New Testament, or Brit Hadashah. Now, the year always ends on the Shabbat and starts on the first day of the year, as we covered before. And the reason I'm mentioning this again is because there are some Israelites who believe that the Tekufa, or the equinox, is always on the 20th of March. Okay, forgive me for saying that name, because it is the name of another deity, another Roman deity. You know, that's how they got us again, also by naming all the days of the months after their Roman deities and all the days of the week after Germanic deities. And as Yahuwah told Moshe, we are not supposed to speak the names of any other deities. As for the other versions of the calendar that are calculated by the, I forget how they say it, some type of happening in the Shemayim having to do with a moon cycle. But that was calculated on a globe Earth. And if you read the scripture, the Earth is actually a circle and it's flat. I mean, not flat like a pancake, but it's not a ball. It's a round circle, 360 degrees, and divided in 4 quarters, just like the calendar. So now let's take a look at those other photos that I wanted to share with you that show a timestamp of when the sun came up and when the sun went down. Okay, here's the first photo. See the timestamp up there, 7:35 a.m. on the Bakar, or the Boker of the Shabbat. And now for the next photo. Boker, or Bakar, for those watching the video that may not know, means morning. And here's the second photo. Precisely at 7:35 at the Arab, meaning the sunset. Now, to close this presentation, I have a video of me in the morning of the Tekufa blowing my shofar, precisely at the time that Yahuwah appointed. All praise and honor to Yahuwah in the name of Yahushua for restoring all things to his children and for giving his mercy to all who will hear. Thank you. As we see, good morning everyone. As we see, I'm here at the Tekufa, the spring equinox, right at the time when the sun comes to the 4th gate. Actually, let's do that again. Completely due east.